All right, guys, so here we go. Trump is officially, once again, the president of the United States. It's only been one day, and I'm already completely overwhelmed with the amount of things that I want to talk about on this channel. He pardoned the January 6th rioters. He temporarily delayed the TikTok ban. He's plotting a coup in Venezuela and potentially a war in Mexico against drug cartels. He dropped this meme coin scam, just a crypto grift to squeeze a little bit more out of his supporters here right before he took office. He's dropped an entire slate of various executive orders, and he's apparently planning some imminent mass deportation raids. So a lot of stuff that we're going to have to get into over the next couple of days and weeks here. But for this one, I want to focus in on a question that he was asked by a reporter in regards to this sort of fake ceasefire, temporary ceasefire that was touted by Biden and by Trump. They both sort of try to take credit for it in regards to Gaza. And we're going to get a little bit of a gauge here on his confidence level that this ceasefire will be able to go through phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 and potentially lead to a more long-term solution. And he's also going to get into something that we talked about previously in regards to Jared Kushner and how he's sort of eyeing the Gaza beachfront and what could potentially be done to develop it for his benefit or his friend's benefit. So let's go ahead and jump into this clip here.
Confident are you, Mr. President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the three phases of this deal?
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident. But I think they're very weakened on the other side.
Do you support the two-state solution?
Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
Do you plan to help rebuilding Gaza?
I might. You know, Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, the best weather. You know, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, but it's very interesting. But some fantastic things could be done with Gaza.
How do you see the future in going?
Some fantastic things could be done with Gaza, right? Notice how he's not talking about the Palestinian population or any sort of like humanitarian concerns over the genocide that we have been fully complicit in throughout the entirety of it. No concern for the actual human beings who live there, right? He's viewing it from the framework of, that's some nice beachfront property. How could I potentially profit off of developing that, right? That's sort of the angle that he's taking on this. Now, also interesting there, again, that he says, it's not our war. Okay, if it's not our war, or genocide as it would be more accurately referred to, why are we sending tens of billions of dollars in weapons to Israel? That's another interesting thing that, you know, you'll notice when you listen to conservatives is many of them will be very critical of the aid that we're sending to Ukraine. A much smaller amount of them will be critical of the aid that we are sending to Israel. Right? When it comes to Ukraine, it's, oh, we're sending billions of dollars to fund this war overseas, and that money could be used on Americans here back at home. Strangely, they don't really have that same take when it comes to Israel. So we'll see how Trump handles this moving forward, but it's pretty clear. He doesn't believe that this is a real ceasefire. Okay? This is sort of a temporary pause. Let's get some of our hostages back and then go in and continue the genocide. That's what this is. While also, by the way, significantly ramping up the ethnic cleansing and the violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. We'll get to more of that here in a minute. But again, just as a reminder, we also heard a similar take here from Jared Kushner. This is back from 2024, where he said that Gaza's waterfront property could be very valuable. Again, notice the phrasing here. He was also asked, I believe, on a separate occasion, whether or not he thinks the Palestinian population should be able to go back to their homes. And he basically said no. He said most of them are dead, right? So why should they be able to go back to their homes? Now, we also have this reporting here from Axios, further emphasizing that this ceasefire was never really a ceasefire agreement. And keep in mind, this is the same exact framework that could have been passed, if you listen to Qatari officials, as far back as in December of 2023. That's how long this framework, basically the same parameters, has been around. December of 2023. It was also pushed by Biden last summer, and now it finally, sort of comes into play. But again, it's not a real ceasefire because they're not planning on going through every phase and taking it seriously and pulling out of Gaza. They're just planning on going right back in. So here from Axios, they say Netanyahu said during his meeting with his security cabinet that he received guarantees from both Biden and Trump that if negotiations over the second phase of the ceasefire deal fail, which Israel will make sure that they do, and Israel's security demands are not met, which they will insist that they aren't, Israel will be able to resume the war in Gaza with U.S. backing. So again, both Biden and Trump on the same page when it comes to full-throatedly supporting this genocide. Now, we also have, again, reporting here from Jeremy Scahill on the explosion of violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. So he says here that Israeli forces are now invading and attacking parts of Jenin in the West Bank and announced a major operation codenamed Iron Wall or Iron Shield. Yesterday, the IDF Chief of Staff said to expect significant operations in the West Bank in the coming days. And you can see a little bit of video here of some of those Israeli occupation force tanks and other military equipment moving through the West Bank. You also have another angle of that here. He also continues down here. He says that Israel claims that the operation is to eliminate ticking bomb threats. And Defense Minister Israel Katz said that the attack on Jenin is specifically related to threats against West Bank settlements, but it is the settlers who have been intensifying their campaign of terror in revenge for the freedom of Palestinian captives, and Trump is lifting sanctions on them. More on that here in a second. But notice this kind of bizarre justification that's going on here. The West Bank settlements are illegal. They're totally illegal under U.S. law and international law, by the way. And yet they're claiming self-defense. Self-defense. Many of these, by the way, are also illegal under Israeli law, but that doesn't really, come into effect in any serious way. But they're claiming self-defense for their illegal settlers who are attacking and terrorizing the Palestinian population. I mean, imagine that. Imagine somebody breaks into your home and you go to defend your property and then they claim self-defense and they shoot you, right? That's what's going on here. You would think Americans would be able to sort of understand this dynamic. And yet when it comes to Israel, not even turning a blind eye, but actively supporting it and encouraging it. Now, they also say here from Dropsite News that, playing into this ceasefire agreement was obviously the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian hostages. And I'm calling them hostages because that's what they are. They're not prisoners. Many of them are being held without trial, without any sort of due process. So there was an exchange of hostages, and Israel is already going and mass arresting Palestinians in the West Bank after, the initial portion were released. So they say here from Dropsite that after releasing 90 Palestinian captives on Sunday as part of the ceasefire and exchange deal, Israeli forces detained over 90 Palestinians across the illegally occupied West Bank in just 24 hours. They say at least 20 of those detained have been arrested, the Palestinian Prisoners Affairs Authority reports. And they have some video here of some of these dozens and dozens of people being marched off. So that's a great deal that we have going here. A deal that you're going to go back into Gaza to continue the genocide in, a few weeks, if that. It's not as if the bombing is really completely ceased, which you would think would be a part of a ceasefire agreement, that you would cease the firing. But you haven't really ceased the firing. Maybe you've eased up a little bit. You're going to go back with full force in a few weeks' time. And as you're doing a prisoner or hostage exchange, you're just going and rounding up a new batch of hostages. I mean, it's incredible. Now, we also have here from B'Tselem in terms of not only the Israeli occupation forces going into the West Bank, but also Israeli settlers who are backed by the Israeli security forces going and essentially doing pogroms across the West Bank. So here from B'Tselem, an Israeli outlet, last night, settlers backed, escorted, and with full cooperation from the Israeli army, attacked Palestinian communities in the West Bank. In Sebastia, a 15-year-old boy was shot and killed by soldiers, and in Sinjil, 6 Palestinians were injured by Molotov cocktails, and in numerous intersections, settlers rioted and threw stones at Palestinian vehicles. While the deal progresses, the settlers' rioters are clear to impose a price tag for the release of Palestinians from Israeli prison. So they're making clear exactly why they're doing this, right? And these kinds of attacks happen frequently throughout the West Bank from Israeli terrorist settlers, but they're making it clear that we don't like the fact that you're doing a hostage swap, right? And so we are going to go and terrorize Palestinian civilians in the West Bank, shoot some of them, throw Molotov cocktails at some of them, destroy property, and we're going to sort of enact some sort of bloody revenge for the fact that Palestinian hostages are being swapped out for Israeli ones. Now, to show you a little bit of the aftermath of that, and how this ethnic cleansing, this settler colonial project actually takes place, we have here again from Dropsite that the Al Funduk village in the West Bank has now been sealed off by Israeli forces following a violent attack by Israeli settlers acting under the protection of the Israeli army. Shops are closed and only settlers' vehicles are allowed on the roads. Across the West Bank, at least 21 Palestinians were injured in separate attacks. So you notice what's happening here, right? You have illegal Israeli settlers and illegal Israeli occupying army working in tandem to go and terrorize and attack Palestinians. And then after the attack takes place, they say, oh, for security reasons, we need to prevent you from going back here, right? We're going to close down your shops. We're going to block off your roads and only allow the Israeli settlers to use them. This is settler colonialism in action right here. You're witnessing it, in HD footage in the year 2025, okay? This is how this shit works. Now, again, as pointed out previously, at the same time as all of this is happening, Trump is lifting sanctions on West Bank settlers as anti-Palestinian violence flares up in the occupied area. He's lifting sanctions, right? Some of these sanctions, I think, were put in place by the Biden administration. Biden eased off on some of them. And I mean, keep in mind, guys, these sanctions, they're not putting pressure on Israel, right? This is not a real leverage point that Biden or any other U.S. president is using over Israel to stop the settlement expansion, right? This was never going to stop the settlement expansion in the first place. But this is just a signal from the Trump administration that there are no brakes on the car here for you guys, right? We're not even going to, as Biden sometimes did, do like the pretend finger wagging and be upset with you about the ethnic cleansing and the genocide. This is Trump signaling to Israel, you can go do whatever the fuck you want, right? Why else did I get $100 million from Miriam Adelson? I mean, guys, we reported on this at the time. $100 million from Miriam Adelson. And the deal was, I give you this money for your campaign, and then you allow Israel to fully annex the West Bank. That's what the deal was. Now we're seeing the deal actually in action, right? Now, we also had here this part of this Senate hearing that I thought was interesting. I just saw this floating across my timeline a few hours ago. This is Senator Chris Van Hollen, who, relative to other senators, has actually been decent on the issue of Israel and Gaza and has been willing to criticize Israel. And here he is having a back and forth with a top Trump ally on Israel's biblical right to the West Bank.
But I did ask you whether you subscribe to the views of Finance Minister Smotrich.
Of who? I'm sorry, Finance.
Smotrich, this is the Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich, and the former National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, who believe that Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank. And in that conversation, you told me that, yes, you shared that view. Is that your view today?
Yes.
So there you go. She's not the only one in Trump's orbit that has this view. This is basically what all Christian right-wing Zionists believe at this point. We also saw that clip a couple of days ago of Mike Huckabee, who was saying essentially that he doesn't believe that Palestinians exist. He doesn't support a two-state solution. So, I mean, again, it's not as if Democrats or Biden, were aggressively pushing and fighting for a two-state solution or something like that. But again, now it's just, we're not even doing the pretend aspect of it, right? Now we're just full-throatedly saying Israel has a right, because of what it says in biblical texts, to seize this land from Palestinians, to ethnically cleanse them from the area so that they can create a Jewish ethno-state. This is what top Trump allies are openly saying. Now, we also have here from Reuters, again, as he's lifting these sanctions on the settlers, he's also lifting a pause on 2,000-pound bombs that were being supplied to Israel. Keep in mind, guys, these bombs have a potential lethal radius of, I think it was somewhere around like 1,000 feet. And Israel was dropping hundreds of these bombs on Gaza, one of the most densely populated places on the face of the planet, right? Trump is now lifting that. We're going to send them more 2,000-pound bombs. At the same time that we're getting images like this out of Gaza. Guys, what could you possibly be bombing at this point. There is nothing left. As Trump was saying in that first clip that we watched, it essentially looks like the entire thing has been demolished to the ground, right? What could you possibly need more 2,000-pound bombs for other than just bouncing the rubble, as I think it was Lindsey Graham once said? That's all that they're doing now at this point. There is no civilian infrastructure, any meaningful, life-sustaining apparatus that is left inside of Gaza. They've displaced the entire population. The population is malnourished. They've attacked schools and churches and hospitals and mosques. Everything that you could possibly imagine has been leveled to the ground. And Trump is saying, we need to send them more 2,000-pound bombs. So there's your update for today. I'm sure that we're going to have more in the coming days as this ceasefire deal continues to implode in on itself, because Israel is not interested in a real ceasefire. Clearly, Trump and Biden also aren't interested in a ceasefire. And looks like Trump is doing exactly what we expected and warned that he was going to do in regards to Israel, but also in regards to the West Bank more specifically, and allowing Israel to ramp up the ethnic cleansing, to ramp up the settlement project, and eventually to fully annex the entirety of the West Bank. So keep you guys posted over the next couple of days. We're headed for pretty dark times, to say the least.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying